Hi, this is Fountain, and today I'm going to talk about the significance of pine cones. Now, as some of you are aware, there's at least 100 species of pine cones that have been identified within the scientific community as of date, and interesting enough, most pine trees have pine cones that are actually fully edible. Also, you can eat the bark on some of the trees and also some of the nettles. However, I would highly recommend that you do your own research as to what ones are safe to eat. Excuse me, I am recording this in a public space, so you will see people potentially wandering around in the background. Yeah, so as I was saying, I don't want to be held responsible for someone just randomly deciding to eat a tree that they see and then getting really sick for it. So please do your research about what's safe and what's not so safe to eat. Now, pine trees normally live anywhere sort of between 100 to 1,000 years old. Obviously, we have pine trees that are documented to be well over 4,000 years old as well in certain parts of the world. So they can live a really, really long time, depending on what pine species it is, and obviously depending on how much human interaction there's been in the environment. So also another thing to know is that actually a lot of the female pine trees will grow pine cones, usually larger than the male cones, obviously for particular scientific, biological kind of reasons, not reasons that I'm going to go into in this video, but it's just good to know, like you might see the same species but wonder why the size of the pine cones are quite significantly different between one and the other. Now, what I'm most interested in, obviously, with the pine cone is the ancient symbolism of the pine cone and how that really comes across in many different religions and cultures throughout, like at least the last 5,000 years. Now, as I'm recording this on the land of, as most people would know it, Australia. Now, they have many different types of pine trees here. And my favourite one that I actually like to use with my cleansing sticks is she oak. And that's a really good tree for, well, they say you could pretty much burn it when it's damp. Like, it's really, really good as a fire starter. As a cleansing stick, I really like using it as a good form of protection. And it makes a really beautiful stick. It's really long sort of nettles of the pine, of the she oak. It's like a swamp kind of pine, so it looks quite different than, say, maybe some of your American style pines. And it doesn't always necessarily have pine cones on it either, and it just makes a really good center point of the cleansing stick. Anyway, I kind of digress. So back to the ancient civilizations and symbolism. So I guess what I've come across is there's usually about four main messages that a lot of religions and cultures have used with pine cones. So one of them is it can be a symbol of enlightenment. Another is fertility. Another is third eye, and then the other one is often referred to as the eternal life. And so to give you some examples of ancient civilizations and some of the imagery that you can probably find even just online is, you often see the staff of Osiris, and there's like a pine cone often at the top of like intertwined serpents, and that's just one example. Another example is you can sometimes find Hindu gods that have pine cones in their hands. You can also find sometimes pictures of Shiva, and Shiva's hair is woven with snakes, and it's kind of like in the shape of pine cones as well. Another example is you'll find a lot of these sort of Assyrian civilizations had like carvings of god-like figures, right, with pine cones often in their hands, or they often had some other thing with the pine cone. I don't think there's also, like, there's so many examples. I think there's a deity called Dionysus or Dionysus. Yeah, I think it's like Dionysus, and they are often carrying a staff with a pine cone at the top. And even the Catholic religion, hey, like if you're Catholic, that's awesome. I'm not putting you down, but even the Catholic religion has quite a lot of pine cone symbology throughout their religion. And like even if you look at some of the pictures of like the Vatican And even some of the things like that the Pope, even what the Pope wears like on their head, it's just I out of all like sort of Christian religions, I wouldn't always expect the pine cone symbology to be there. But then if you dive really much deeper into where religion kind of comes from, you will start to understand why it's there. Anyway, I slightly digress. So also, I'm not sure if some of you are aware, but there's actually a particular part in the body, in the brain actually, which is often referred to as like the pineal gland. It's like kind of almost in the center of the brain, and it's really good for regulating melatonin, but it also has other spiritual kind of properties related to it too, like intuition. And often it's referred to, as the third eye or the first eye. And it kind of, when they talk about it, they kind of talk about it in this point here within the front of the head. And often pine cones are like depicted at the top of like a staff, right? So a stick. And the pine cone can often refer to as like the third eye, the first eye, and then the staff can sometimes represent like the spine of the body. So I don't know if you know much about sort of kundalini and things like that, or energy that can sit at the bottom of the spine, and it can work its all the way up to the pineal gland, and then that's when some say that you can then really awaken certain abilities within yourself, sort of magic that we all kind of have, but often sits kind of dormant, or we don't use it, and we're often not taught about it unless you're in particular kind of communities or occult-like groups, or maybe even particular religious things, religious groups, should I say. Now, there was another thing I was going to mention. Oh yeah, so it often can symbolize, I know I've got like some Celtic ancestry myself, and lots of other ancestries as well, but that often pine cone can symbolize sexuality. And I know the Romans often associated the pine cone with the goddess of love, otherwise known as Venus. And so with the Mexican and Assyrian symbologies of the pine cones, it's often depicted as meaning like eternal life. And sometimes you also see that the pollen of the pine cones is sprinkled around. Have you ever seen the tree of life? Which is another sort of interesting symbol, I guess, that we could go into in another video. And I do want to make note here that these interpretations that I'm providing you about, some of this cultures and religions, it's not necessarily the only interpretation of the pine cone, and don't just take my word as the be all end all. I'd highly recommend do your own research as well, and you will probably find many other religions and cultures that also refer to the pine cone. And I guess what I really wanted to end this on is it's just interesting how nature can really teach us through many metaphors, and the fact something is what many would consider a simple pine cone, and how that can really, through so many nations, so many cultures and so many religions, can really show up, and how it all kind of is interpreted slightly differently. But if you really look at it from the big overall picture, it actually all comes back to the same, meaning the same thing. But I'll let you do your own pondering and research into that yourselves. And if you'd like to leave any comments or questions, you can in the comment section down below. I've also got various other social media platforms in which you can contact me on. They are all linked up in the description box down below. And then I hope to see you in the next vlog. Bye.